From the New York Times here, article dated March 9th, 2019. It's about running. Specifically, the author seems to be interested in sponsorship. As many of you might know, shoe companies primarily and occasionally someone else will sponsor very good runners, ones likely to win races or place highly in famous races, races that will be covered by the press. A lot of races are even on mainstream TV these days, although not as many as I'd like because I enjoy watching it. So he's talking about how the sport has become, I quote, running has become democratized. Instead of it being a sport only for very fit, very fast, skinny white dudes. Now, anyone who's watched a major marathon or something like that on TV will have a hard time calling most of the leaders white or male necessarily. You're going to find a couple dozen men and a couple dozen women that the TV cameras tend to follow, but he calls them white. I certainly don't call East Africans white, but he points out it's almost for everyone, and we have a broad range of people in it. Okay, that's true. Behind that pack of Kenyans and Ethiopians are, 1,000 or 20,000, depending what race you're talking about, what you might call regular people, amateurs. They paid to run it. They're certainly not getting paid. Although, again, this article seems to be about sponsorship, and it touches on the idea that some of those kind of people that aren't in danger of breaking any world records, have been sponsored. I don't know if they're wearing the logos of their sponsor or if they have a fast food chain or beverage company logo on the front or back of their t-shirt. Probably the kind of thing he's referring to when it comes to more commoners being sponsored in some sense. But then we get to the interesting part here. He says, that is not to say that running is perfect. And that's a quote here, and as is the next sentence. At the recreational level, it's still overwhelmingly white. Now, the fact that that's an imperfection suggests that, he thinks it's a problem that should be changed or solved, perhaps would maybe be the better answer. And I don't know if any of you think that or not. So here's my take. I believe it can be changed, and here are the ways to do so. Since amateur running certainly is purely voluntary, some people get into it. The vast majority of people don't. I mean, you might see 50,000 people running the New York Marathon or something, or Peachtree Road Race in Atlanta, or Beta Breakers in San Francisco. Those people are voluntarily doing so, and the people that didn't do it, which is by far the most people, even given those big numbers in some of the most famous races, you still have 100 million people, a couple 100 million people, depending on how big of an area you're talking about. If you're talking about the whole country, the population of it. Subtract 1 million people out, and then you have a bunch of people who don't run in any serious competitive manner, and so is that a problem, and can that be solved? Well, yeah, it certainly can be, and the first way that comes to mind is to do it is either force people that currently aren't doing so, and I guess if you were the one that had the authority to force them, you get to pick their demographic, you get pick their race, age, whatever, and make them do it. You'd have to have the threat of fine or jail or something. So it really could only be a government that could do that has the authority of, it's basically at the point of a gun in the sense that there's a punishment and the government will make good on that if you don't do it. Or you could stop people that are currently doing it from doing it. Now that would be easier because you take people now that aren't interested in it at all. There's probably people that would be willing to pay the fine as opposed to getting on the couch, because all of you that don't run out there know how uncomfortable it is and know perhaps the reasons you don't do it. It's hard to run any distance really, compared to bicycling, compared to walking even. It seems to be harder than bicycling, I guess a lot of people say, but both of them are far easier than running, right? Driving a car or riding in a car or bus or subway or anything like that's much easier yet. So you can force by, coercion, people that don't do it to do it more easily, people that currently do it to stop. Okay, so this is an example where a totalitarian government would be able to solve all such social inequities or problems or dilemmas or whatever it is that the New York Times author is imagining exist. And perhaps many of you, certainly many people in the population, consider things like that to be a problem. We can go on to things like majors in colleges and universities. Some say more, male students major in certain majors. Often people throw out the hard sciences, engineering, physics, other things that I can't even name or pronounce, right? And more females enter some of these language things like comparative literature or library science or any number of things I'm not even aware of, not being the most educated person in the world myself, there supposedly are traditionally male and traditionally female majors. And again, that could very easily be solved by forcing people to major in certain things. You line up the population, you say this many men, this many women, make it half and half in every major, make the races either percentages consistent with the population of the world or percentages consistent with the population of the US. Probably the former, probably the world, because you have any number of people coming from other parts of the world to go to, the major United States universities. So that's another example where you have this great social problem, or should I say problem, because it may or may not be, right? In which people voluntarily make choices. It really is a voluntary choice, to or not to attempt to major in astrophysics. You might not finish, you might flame out in a year, partway through the first semester, you might have to switch majors, but surely you have the option, if you're in the university, accepted, admitted, you've matriculated, and someone's paid for it, I don't know if you have or your parents or whatever, there you are. You have the option of majoring in anything, geophysics, astrophysics, any of that, even something comparatively mundane but quite useful and marketable like civil engineering. You have the option of majoring in that. Now, whether or not you complete a degree or much less complete an advanced degree is another story, but you could have initially signed up for that major. It's voluntary. So the way to change that, the very easy way to change that, is to force people to sign up for certain majors. It would really be no problem. Take this many people of this gender and ethnic group and, assign each one to a certain major, so there's nothing that's unequal or disproportional with the world's population in any one subject, major, topic, class, or anything. So that's another example where totalitarianism would easily solve all these dilemmas that people have been poring over, really not for centuries, but certainly for decades now, that everyone seems to be woke, which I approve of, and I think people should be thinking more open-minded than the common 18th century dweller. So it's great that we even ask such questions or even compare these statistics. That alone is a step forward in my mind. Another way besides pure force with the punishment of jail, imprisonment, whatever, would be payment. In fact, this New York Times article touches on the idea that people that aren't elite, aren't on TV winning the Boston Marathon or the World Championships or Olympics, are being sponsored. That would be a way to straighten this out, if indeed it is a problem and if indeed it needs to be fixed. You take people that don't run. I don't know if this guy's referring mainly to black people or Asians or what. Seems to me that quite a few of both of them. I recently watched the Tokyo Marathon, and I'll tell you, there didn't seem to be many white people on the camera, but you certainly see Kenyans, Ethiopians, and Japanese doing it. But in this country, perhaps that's slightly less true. So all you do is you take them and pay them enough. And there's a lot of people now that don't want to run. I mean, most of you, quite frankly, right? And who's to blame you, really? Don't want to, but for a certain amount of money would. Right? I mean, for a certain amount, there's a price for which you would go run your local 5K, and you could do the same with colleges. You could take a male applicant and say, we'll give you a full ride scholarship, we'll give you, I don't know, the free dorms and, pass to the dining hall, or I guess is it called a cafeteria anymore? Is it a dining hall? I don't know. We'll give you all of that, a car with insurance, et cetera, et cetera. If you major in some foreign language literature class or something like that, and take all the female students and offer, every one of them, knowing that only some of them will take you up on it. Some of them are heavily parentally sponsored enough and really do not want for money. Some of the foreign ones are from the richest 1% of their country, so they're probably going to be less easily swayed by money. But then other foreign ones, that's by no means the case, right? And so you say, look, we're going to pay you, whatever amount, throw them $100,000 a year if that's what it takes to major in, electrical engineering, or I don't know what, some form of physics or something like that. That would do it too, Problem is, with that, you'd have to have someone to pay for it. That's the same problem we see with women's sports versus men's sports. You hear about people talking about, WNBA players not making as much as, NBA, the male NBA players. And although that's certainly true and no one disputes it, the place that money they're being paid comes from is from a couple things. One is people that buy tickets to watch it live in the arena, and that can be a fair amount of money. A basketball arena might hold 20,000 people, and for most NBA games, it's going to be pretty close to full. Even a team that hasn't been good in a few years, the stands are by no means 3/4 empty when the camera pans up there, and they buy concessions, and but I got to think even more so is the fact these games are on TV generates advertising revenue, right? I mean, the point of TV is to sell ad space, obviously, and those ads are voluntarily purchased. Okay, I mean, there's people that want to buy ad space during an NBA game. Certainly playoffs, the finals or whatever, but even just your average, just another game for your local team on a Tuesday evening, someone's buying that ad space. So that TV revenue and other ad revenue, now they have logos on their jerseys. WNBA seems to have had it for longer. I noticed that a couple years back, I don't know exactly how long, but this year you see it on NBA players. So that, the ads that are popping up on the side of the arena, you see a lot of that even in ice skating and stuff. There's an ad on the little wall, and it sticks up next to the rink, that, but obviously the TV ads are quite valuable if you add enough of them up through 82 games. Even your little local channel that covers just your team is making a pretty penny. So that's where that money comes from, the man, or people talk about they do this in the world, they plan these wars, they plan, depressions and stuff. Some people talk about some overriding force. I don't know if they mean the government or primarily the U.S. president or who exactly they're talking about, but that's not really who pays athletes, is it? They, some big overwhelming force, the man or something, isn't who pays it. So the way to even that would be easy. And so, like I said, on some of these other topics, money would even things out and cause a very even distribution of races and sexes and everything you might want to see in any given sport or endeavor, an educational pursuit, whatever it might be, the Scrabble, tournament, annual convention thing or whatever, you can make that exactly even. You can make the spelling be even, because we all know that that's overwhelmingly populated by South Asian kids. Well, you'd pay some of them, but by paying them, you really have to force someone to pay them, don't you? I mean, to generate this money to pay him, who has to do that? Well, you got to take that from somebody. So again, it's only a government can do that. That's really no different than the same kind of totalitarian regime I'm talking about that would force you to run or force you not to run if you're white and male and do so now. I guess this guy seems to think they're mostly white and male. Seems to me most of your average races are at least half female. And again, the people up at the front are by no means white, as far as I can tell, being an enthusiast of track and field and road racing and watching it on TV whenever I get the chance. But, that's the demographic he's trying to thin out in the percentages so you could, force them not to or pay them not to. But paying them not to really is the same thing about as forcing somebody, because you're forcing someone else to pay that guy not to run, or forcing someone else to pay someone female and black to run. right? You have to force someone to pay that. And so that's why WNBA players aren't making what NBA players are, because the money that NBA players make is voluntarily being paid from, private citizens and private entities. I don't know, is that some legal term? Entity, companies, soft drinks and, cars and whoever buys ads during these games, right? And so it's voluntarily being done, So the way to even it out would be to force everyone going to, a NBA game to have to also buy a WNBA ticket for the closest team. Minneapolis has one of each. There's one of each in Sacramento. LA has two male NBA teams, one WNBA. You can go out to East Coast. Some of the cities are closer together. Boston, Philly, New York. I believe there's a Connecticut team maybe that's a WNBA team. I follow the East Coast teams a little less closely, But I'll tell you that I watched those games. I certainly caught, the finals the last couple of years. I certainly try to watch the last game of it. If not, I'm not always in front of a TV. And they're great athletes. No one disputes that. The WNBA players are fantastic athletes. They're great games, I think it was 2 years ago the finals went to 5 games. That's all they have, not 7. It would be 7, of course, if advertisers wanted to pay a couple $1,000,000 for a 30-second slot were beating on their door to make it 7 games. Then it certainly would be, right? But what you could do is you could take everyone buying an NBA commercial and a regular season game for kind of an average team only costs a certain amount, and a finals playoff, commercial obviously costs more than that, but force them to buy an equivalent commercial, Tuesday night for some mid-season WNBA game, or, the last game of the finals, whatever it is. And so again, that's something that coercion could easily solve, right? I mean, if everyone buying a $200 ticket for a basketball game had to buy another one, and everyone buying a $100,000 commercial or $1,000,000 commercial or $1,000 commercial, it might be, right? Because I'm talking the whole spectrum of games, had to buy another one, the WNBA would be generating just as much revenue. Right, because the players are fantastic. I mean, I say that in all seriousness. That's not the problem, So, that's yet another example of a time that totalitarianism and coercion would solve everything, wouldn't it? I mean, we'd have no social problems if nothing was voluntarily being done, and no money was voluntarily being exchanged, or sports participated in, or educational pursuits or games, or flying kites in the park. That would be exactly demographically correct, or whatever you'd want to call it, if it was being forced, upon certain people and prohibited to other people. So there's your thought for the night. You're listening to The Way of Life.